What's going on? I hope you guys are doing good. Today, I'm going to teach you how to create motion graphics and visual effects using a combination of Midjourney for the images, Runway ML Gen 3 Alpha Turbo for the animation, and then we're going to use After Effects to composite everything together. All right, let's get into it. I created this image in Midjourney. This is the prompt that I used. Close-up shot of an Icelandic woman's arm covered in colorful wire, AR 16:9 Style Raw V6. And Midjourney gave me an image with 6 fingers. And I was like, come on, Midjourney. You guys create amazing images, but this ain't it. And the wires were all over the place. I wanted wires that were smoother, simple looking, and that they followed the curve of the woman's arm. So I decided to use this image as style ref image in the hopes of getting something better. So let's go through that process. So when you're using style reference, make sure that you click on the paperclip button. What it's going to do is it's going to take the overall color, the aesthetic of the image, and it's going to apply it to the new image you're trying to create. So I submitted it. I went through all the images. My goal with this is to create an image with wires, but then also create an image without wires so that in After Effects, I can composite them together and make something really cool. Once I got this image, I was like, okay, this image looks really good. And lucky for me, Midjourney just came out with a new editing feature that allows you to edit your images and prompt new things into the image. Let's go through that process right now. I lowered the size of the brush and I started brushing the wires away. Boom, boom, boom. I switched up the prompt here and I changed the prompt to a Caucasian woman's bare arm because I tried other prompts, but it wasn't doing what it needed to do. So I had to be more specific with the type of skin. I also deleted the previous style reference because it was just giving me other images. And I wanted this image to stay the same, but just change to a bare arm. Press submit. And after a while, it gave me this image. I was like, yo, this image is great. But then it had these watermarks, so sweat. So I decided to go back into the editor and clean those up. Lowered the brush again, went over those marks, and left the prompt the same. Hit submit, and it cleaned up the image beautifully. I was like, oh man, this is it. Once Midjourney cleaned up the image for me, I created a subtle upscale of this image, and it gave me an upscale version of this image with a little bit more detail. The power of generating an image that you want and then being able to go back into the image, clean it up, and create something totally new so that you can composite it After Effects. The next step was to bring this into Photoshop and lighten up this dark area in the arm. Also, this little weird thing right here in between her index and middle finger. So here in Photoshop, I added a levels effect to brighten up this area in the image. I raised the mids to 1.26. Then I went into the mask and I inverted it. And then I used the brush to brush over the dark areas, right? I softened up the brush and brushed over those dark areas to make them lighter so they can match the rest of the lightness on our hand. Then I inverted the brush and started softening it up so that part of our arm blends it with the hand. After that, I cleaned up this little area with the rubber stamp tool. I sampled the yellow areas around and I went over the image and rubber stamped that out. There you go, boom, boom. Then after that, I turned the levels effect on and off just to make sure that it did what it needed to do. And then I went over to Runway, selected that image, brought it in, and wrote a prompt. A woman's hand closes with a muted color palette. It was suggested by Runway to put muted color palette after your prompts so that it maintains the color palette of your original image. Because whenever you're prompting in Runway, it adds saturation to your images, and Runway did a great job at maintaining the color palette. I ran this through Gen 3 Alpha Turbo. I don't know how this thing does this, but it generated an image of the hand moving in 30 to 40 seconds. I was mind blown. How did it take this static image and inject movement into the hand? Incredible. This wasn't the only generation I created. I created a whole bunch, maybe 20 of them. I was trying to originally get her to close her hand and open it because I was going to reverse it, and Runway created monstrosities. I was like, what the heck? Maybe the training data is not there yet. So I said, you know what? All right, let me just roll with this and let me see if this whole thing even works. And then after that, I brought it into After Effects in order to track the hand motion with the Power Mesh tool in Mocha Pro. What I'm gonna do here in After Effects is I'm gonna drag in the image with the wires. I'm gonna mask out the wires in order to place them on the arm. But in order to do that, I need to align the wires to the first frame of the runway image. I pre-composed the wire image. I went into the pre-comp and I started masking out the wires in order to get a rough animation. I didn't get too detailed because I wanted to see if the Power Mesh in Mocha Pro actually works. I'm just using a simple mask to go over the wires, and I'll just speed this up because this takes a little bit. All right, so once the wires were masked, I was like, okay, cool. Let's start tracking this with the Power Mesh and Mocha Pro to see if this even works. Because the thing is, there's no need to get detail with the wires if the Power Mesh is not working. So if the track works, then you go back into the wires or whatever you're trying to comp and you really get in there and get detailed. So now I'm here in Mocha Pro, and what I'm doing is I'm selecting only the parts that the wires are gonna be composited on. I didn't have to go out into the other fingers. All right. So we just selecting this whole arm. All right. And they also said to make your selection within the object because it just makes for a better track. So here I'm just cleaning things up, making sure that it's a little simplified, deleting points that we don't really need, making sure that the points are even. There's no real rhyme or reason for that. It's just mostly aesthetically, I just want the points to be a little bit even. And then here I went into the uniform surface in order to make the track more uniform, because they suggest it's always good to use the uniform mesh for skin with all the other default settings. And then I went on to track it. And this took a little bit to track, but it did a great job at tracking that hand movement. So once it was done, I just scrubbed through the timeline, let the timeline play in order to see if the track is doing what it needs to do. And I think Mocha did a great job with the Power Mesh tool. I see that it's distorting based on the hand's movement. And I was like, oh man, this is great. And then what I did was I copied the layer, renamed it to Hand Track 1. I duplicated it in order to make another version. Usually what I do is when I duplicate, I usually use the Align to Surface tool. What that does is the Power Mesh gets applied to the size of the comp and not the little area that it tracked on. There you go, press the Align to Surface tool, there you go. So then what I did after that was I copied the Mocha effect and applied it to the wires comp. And what I did here was I went down to the module renders, clicked on render, clicked on this drop down and selected Stabilize Warp. And what that does is it applies the stabilized warp to the wires comp. And it did a great job at deforming the wires to the contours of this hand. And I was amazed. I was like, oh, this is awesome. Now I could go back into the wires and really get in there, start animating those wires, start really working on that mask. And I played it a couple of times to make sure that it did what it needed to do, and it did an amazing job. So the next step here is to start animating the wires revealing on the arm. So what I did was I went into the wires comp and I started drawing splines on the wires. Now this took a long time because it's like probably 200 wires. So I'm gonna speed through this whole part. So usually when you make a shape layer in After Effects, what it does is it creates flat edges to each of the splines. So what I did was I selected all of those splines and I changed them from butt caps to rounded caps. And what it did was it rounded the edges of all of those splines. So as they're sprouting, they have a nice round edge. Then I selected all the layers again and applied a trim path preset that I usually apply to anything that I'm trying to reveal. It's always good to create presets because the thing about this is I would have had to animate all these by hand. Now the trick is I have to go into this comp and I have to make sure that all of the animations are happening separately, where one spline animates, another one sprouts out of it, and then another one sprouts out of that one, then another one sprouts out. So it wasn't as easy as just applying a preset to all of them. I still have to go into each layer and start moving layers left and right, start timing it so that all of them feel right. All right, so I applied that preset and I was curious. I was just like, okay, let's go out into the main comp and see how this is looking with the power mesh applied. And this is just a quick way to see if everything's working before you get into the nitty gritty. They can't all animate in at the same time. It can't just be one. They're animating too quickly. So I have to spread those keyframes further so that when they animate outward, they animate out much more smoother, organic, and elegant. So they're like, and then ease into place. I went through the whole animation a couple of times. I went back into the wires comp. I selected all of the second keyframes and I moved them to the right, so that spline animations could happen much more slower and much more elegantly. So now if we go back out into the main comp and play it again, you'll start seeing that the splines are animating a little slower and they ease into their resting place softer. I'm trying to get these wires to animate like vines and then rest slowly. There you go. It's looking a little better. Just scrubbing through, making sure they're doing what they need to do. Another thing too with the way I animated it in the beginning was there was an ease on the first frame. With this type of animation, I wanted them to sprout out quickly and then ease out. So I removed the easy out from the keyframe in order for them to sprout out quicker and ease into place. Certain animations look really nice when the animation starts off slow and then it eases back in slower. In this situation, I just wanted them to animate out fast and then ease in, and it worked perfect in this situation. So now the hardest part about this whole animation is to go into each layer and start making sure these wires overlap at different timing. I had to break wires up, and now being that there was so many wires, it was impossible to do this in one comp. That's why I broke it up in this way. I'm gonna speed up this whole process. All right, so once I thought the animation started looking good, I was like, okay, let me start trying to color correct the wires. So I added this levels effect to match the brightness of the original runway footage. So I'm going through this levels effect. There you go. So now it looks good. The wires match the runway footage better. The power mesh is doing a great job. I'm loving the way they start off fast but ease in at the very end. I noticed some wires were a little bit too extruded out from the hand, and I wanted the wires to conform more to the hand. So what I used is the Bezier effect in order to reshape the wires around the arm. So what I did was I pre-composed the wires mat and image in order to add the Bezier warp effect to them at the same time. So here you go, I labeled it wires reveal reshaped. And what I did here was I added a Bezier warp effect to this layer. I started reshaping the wires while looking at the main comp on the left in order to make sure that they conform to the arm. So this is a great way of just distorting your comps. So I'm just going in there using these points and just making sure that these wires wrap around the arm the way they need to be wrapped. Because the animation looks great, now it's about these little fine tunes. So here you go, I used the Bezier warp tool and it did a great job at just making sure that those wires conform to the edges. All right, so once I went through the animation and I got those wires to animate like vines and everything felt good, this was the time to go back into Photoshop and start cutting out those wires, making sure that we have a perfect wire image. All right, so here what I'm doing is I'm just finding these little holes and I'm using the lasso tool in order to quickly select these holes. And I made a mask, and what I'm doing is I'm filling these selections with black. So I'm just selecting these holes, just going through, I don't know how many holes I had to go through. I got holes in every area code. My bad, I'm sorry. But anyways, so I went through all these holes and just started going in there through the mask and just adding black. And I just did the same process, I think, a million times over. The cool thing about this is if you open up a Photoshop file in After Effects and you save your Photoshop document, it'll update in After Effects. So this is a smart way of working. So I'm gonna speed all this up. All right, so once all those wires were cleaned up in Photoshop, and once it looked right, it was time for me to make it a little bit more realistic. So what I did was I added a drop shadow layer style in order to give the wires a little bit more dimensionality. Once I dialed in the right color, the right amount of distance, the right opacity, it felt like those wires were really on her skin. So after I created the drop shadow, the next step was to create the glow. So what I did here was I grabbed the main wires mat, I dragged that into a new comp, right? Then I copied it, right? If you can see, you can see once I dragged through, I copied it and then I used it as a mat to mask itself. And then I inverted the mat so that you only get the tips. I moved it slightly ahead in the timeline. I added optical glow on top of everything so that I can see the glow on those edges. But now the problem was that when you mat things out this way, you still get this outline. So I used the simple choker effect and I brought it down to negative values and it choked out those edges. Yeah, so once everything looked good and the simple choker worked, I wanted these glows to kind of pulse. So as they're animating outward, I want them to kind of flicker. So I went into the amount setting on the optical glow effect. I alt-clicked on the amount setting and I created a wiggle effect. And then I just tested it to see which one worked. Yeah, that's feeling good. Man, I love the way they feel like vines just animating outward. They all have their own little lives. So now I'm gonna copy all that animation I did and I'm gonna separate the glow. So now we have the wire animation in one comp and then we have the glowing lines in one comp. And what I'm gonna do with the glowing lines is I'm gonna apply it right on top of the runway footage, the wires footage, and that's where we composite, and that's how you make the glow look like it's blending and burning into that footage. So I duplicated the wires reveal comp, Now it's called Wires Reveal 02. And I'm gonna go into the main comp and swap it out with Alt. And then I'm gonna go back into that comp, turn off the wires, and just leave the glows on. And here I added an add blend mode, but the add blend mode is too harsh. So I went in between the add blend mode and the screen blend mode to see which one works better. I want this effect to look nice, but I don't want it to be too in your face. It needs to feel elegant. There needs to be a flow. And right now the add blend mode is it's too much. So now, being that the add blend mode added too much power to the glow, I went back into optical flow and I lowered the amount. So we have the add blend mode, and then we have the amount of optical glow, and we need to find the right balance so that it's not in your face. So now I'm just making sure that I have a side-by-side view. I have main comp with all the composited pieces, and then I also have the comp with the glow, and I'm just gonna go back and forth to see which one works. All right, it's looking nice. We're getting there. And now I'm just playing around with the size to see if it adds just a little bit more aura around the glow. All right, that looks good. I like that nice subtle glow around it. And now here I went back to the wiggle effect, and I'm trying to soften up the wiggle effect a little bit on the amount so that it pulses a little softer. And then what I did was I raised the amount up a little bit, and I'm still going back and forth between the glow and the main comp, the glow and the main comp, just to find the right balance. All right, so at this point, I felt like the glow looked good, and I wanted to add one last effect, which is the echo effect. So I want the main glow to animate out, but it also to leave a subtle trail behind it. So here I was just fidgeting around with the echo effect until it started giving me that trail. There you go. So the decay is what gives you that trail. And then I bumped up the number of echoes so that we get more echoes in there. This effect is also intensive on your CPU, on your GPU. I think this effect crashed my computer once. There you go. As you can see, there's nice little trails, and these trails will animate right behind that main glow. This is looking really nice. So now we're here back out in the main timeline, and what I'm gonna do with the echo effect is add a little blur to it, just to soften it up, because right now it's a little too harsh, just to see if it blends in with the footage a little bit more. So we're gonna pre-render this, and we're gonna check out the animation and see what happens. And it's looking way better. Those trails are looking nice. And now I just added the glow back in just to see what the glow and the trails are doing. And yeah, here's the final result. This is how you can use Midjourney, Runway, and After Effects in Synergy in order to create a cool VFX shot. I hope you guys learned something from this. Hit me up, motion@steventapia.com. Leave me some comments if you like my content. Like, show support, all that good jazz. Peace.